Welcome to Tea with the Druid 129, brought to you by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. Eimear Burke here, and I'll be hosting Tea with the Druid for the next 4 weeks, while Philip has a well-earned rest. One of the arts of Druidry is storytelling, and I love to tell a story. And for me, stories serve different functions. One, can be entertainment, they're humorous, they're fun, but they can also bring about profound healing. Others can be like a parable with a moral in them. And then sometimes when ideas are too complex to understand, stories give us a window into a deeper understanding so that we can access those ideas. And I love the quote by Anne L. Watson. She says that stories tell us what we already know but forgot, and remind us what we haven't yet imagined. And there's another quotation by Philip Pullman, and he says that after food, shelter and companionship, stories are the things that we need most, and I'm inclined to agree with him. And within the order, storytelling weaves the functions of the 3 strands of the order of the Bard, the Ovate and the Druid. So tonight I'd like to tell you a story for the times that we're living in, these times of physical separation, physical isolation, times of fear, times of grief, recent aggression, living with the unknown and living with uncertainty in this time of pandemic. And I'm moving away from the usual format of talk and meditation. Tonight, I invite you to use the story as a meditation and for you to reflect on what this story might mean for you. And stories tend to have many layers of meaning. And as Druids, we are not dogmatic, so we are free to find our own meaning in what it is we experience. And I invite you to do the same. So this is the story about Mish. It's a story about what can cause madness and what can cure madness. Hundreds of years ago, there lived a man called Doire Rogial, and he was a very well-liked and well-respected man. He was wealthy. He was admired for his skill with his sword. And he had a beautiful daughter named Mish, and he loved her dearly, for her mother had died many years before that. And they only had each other. Now Mish was very beautiful, but not only was she beautiful, she had the vision and perception of the hawk. She had the stamina of the stag, the wisdom of the salmon, the endurance of the boar. And because of her beauty and these wonderful qualities that she had, and needless to say, her wealth, men came from far and wide seeking her hand in marriage. But she rejected all suitors. None of them were worthy of her. And her father was inclined to agree, and he was concerned that she would never find a worthy consort in the lands in which they lived. So they decided to sell everything up. And they chartered a ship and set sail. And for 3 weeks they were on the high seas. And eventually they landed off the coast of Ireland in Kerry, in a place called Danganikush, today known as Dingle. And when they disembarked, they found some lodgings. And the next day, Doire Rogial went on a horse and rode out westwards towards Dunhuin, hoping to buy some land there. Now, it's hard enough today to buy land in Dunhuin. It was just as hard in those days. But fortunately, he met a landowner who was willing to part with some land. And Doire Rogial was thrilled, and he said, "Name your price. Money is no object." And the landowner said, "I don't want your money. What I want are your skills with your sword." Doire Rogial, being very competent with a sword, thought nothing of it. The landowner said it was just a minor dispute, and hopefully it'll be over in a day. So they shook hands on it, and Doire Rogial rode back to Dingle, very pleased with the deal he had struck. And when he told Mish that he'd got some land, and she said, how much did it cost? And he said, nothing. I just have to join in a battle tomorrow, and that's the price. And this foreboding and fear went into her heart, and she said, Father, please do not go, for I fear you will not come back to me, and I will be left alone. And he looked into her eyes and confidently said, I promise you, I'll be back by tea time. It's only a skirmish. So they had a sad last meal together, and then they went to bed, and Mish tossed and turned, and Doira, he slept the deepest of sleeps, fully confident in his skills as a swordsman. And it was with great sadness the next day that Mish said goodbye to her father, and he looked again into her eyes and he said, I promise you, Mish, I will be back by tea time. And she watched him with a heavy heart as he rode away. And out he went to Fianthra Ventry, and the battle began. And needless to say, it was a bloody, futile battle, as battles are. It was over within a few hours, with no victors. The bodies of the dead lay everywhere. And when Doira Rogial didn't return at tea time, Mish got on a horse and she rode westwards towards Fianthra. And she was horrified as she saw the battlefield before her. Bodies of the slain scattered everywhere, with the ravens and the crows picking the bones clean. And she could see over there Macha and Bive and the Morrigan waiting patiently to carry the souls of the slain to the other world. And she quickly got down off her horse and looked in vain among the bodies, hoping maybe her father had survived. But then, to her horror, she found him lying on the ground, fatally wounded in a pool of blood. And she held out in grief. It filled her heart. And then she threw herself down on his body and she began to drink his blood. And when she had drunk her fill, she sealed up the grief deeply in her heart. And it was replaced by a raging anger. And then she jumped up and flew off in a frenzy of madness eastwards and landed on the top of a mountain. To this day is known as Sliabh Mish, the mountain of Mish. And such was Mish's rage and anger, she could never sit still. She would run back and forth along the ridge of the mountain, destroying any living creature that came within her way. And the years went by and she became madder and madder. Her hair grew long and became dreaded as it caught the grime and the mud and the leaves of the mountaintop. Her nails grew long until they became gnarled and twisted and as sharp as an eagle's talons. She grew whiskers on her face. And she roared and wailed at night. And people who heard it down in the valley said it was much more terrifying than the howl and the wail of the banshee. And parents used to threaten their naughty children with sending them to Mish if they didn't behave. So every few years there would be a young generation of young men wanting to prove their worth would dare each other to go up the mountain to see if they could slay Mish. And up they go, full of confidence with their swords. But as soon as she laid her eyes on them, she would grab them and just tear them to shreds and scatter them to the four winds. And this went on for a few hundred years. Mish knowing nothing other than her madness, her anger and her rage. And then it was during the reign of Fela Macravan in the barony of Clan Morris. He issued a decree that nobody was to kill Mish, but he offered a reward to anybody who could bring her down the mountain safely. So here was another opportunity for the young men to prove their valour, and off they went. But as soon as she laid eyes on them again, she grabbed them in her talons, tore them to shreds and scattered them to the four quarters. So the older warriors of Munster tried their luck. They met with the same fate. Then the warriors from Connaught, from Leinster, from Ulster, and they too met the same fate. And warriors came from Britain and Europe and from the 4 quarters of the world. And they all met with the same end. Now, Phelim MacCriffin had a harper called Dubh Rush. Now, Dubh Rush was one of the most magical of harpers. He was one of those harpers that could call out the 3 noble strains from the harp. The Gyan 3, the joyful strain, the Gull 3, the sorrowful strain, and the Suan 3, the calming strain or the lullaby. And anyone who heard him was just filled with ease and joy and laughter at the magic that he could weave with his fingers on those strings. So Dubh Rush went to Phelim and said, "Why don't you let me go?" And Phelim said, "You, a harper? Do you really think you're going to charm her with your harping?" And Dubh Rush looked at him and said, "All I need is a handful of silver and a handful of gold, and your blessing, and I will bring her back." Well, he was a free man, so Phelim couldn't keep him, and he said, "Fine, I will give you the gold and silver, but I wish you luck." And he gave him the gold and silver and said goodbye, thinking he would never see his harper again. So Phelim, or Dubh Rush, packed some cheese and bread and some extra clothing, and he put the gold and silver in one bag, and he put his harp into his otterskin bag, and he set off for Slievemish. And it took him 3 days and 3 nights until he arrived at the place where he thought she might be. So he took off his harp and he took it out of the otterskin bag, took off his cloak and he laid it down on the ground, and he scattered the gold and silver coins around the edge. And he lay down and he opened his trousers to reveal his manhood, and then he picked up the harp and played it on his chest. And he played such magical music. And of course, Mish heard these wonderful sounds, and she was really curious, but really taken with the softness, the sweetness of the melody. So she began to walk towards the sound, and there she came across this creature lying on the ground. And Dubh Rush was playing the harp, and he could see her out of the corner of his eye. And then he stopped playing, and she was intrigued, and she said, "Are you a human?" And he said, "Yes, but don't kill me, don't kill me." No, I won't harm you." She's looking at him and she says, "What is that?" And he said, "That's a harp." And she said, My father had one of those. He had a harper he used to play." And as the memory came back, just tears, gentle tears, began to roll down her cheeks. And quickly, Dubh Rush began to play a joyful strain to ease her heart. And when she had stopped crying, he stopped playing. And then she looked at the coins and she said, "Well, what are they?" And he said, "Oh, that's gold and silver." And then she says, "Oh, I remember. We had gold and silver. We ate from golden plates and drank from silver goblets." And then she's looking over there. "What are they?" "Oh, they're my nest eggs." Don't remember those." "And what's that?" Pointing to his manhood. That is a cronlish." "A cronlish?" "Yes, a cronlish, a tricking staff." "Tricking staff? Don't remember my father having one of those." Now she's really intrigued. "Tricking staff, what's the trick?" And he said, "Come here and I'll show you." So he took her by the hand, brought her over and laid her down on the cloak, and he made love to her. And his caresses were as gentle as if he was playing a harp, and he was able to call out those strains within her, the joy and the bliss of being loved, and her heart began to open, and she knew a joy that she had never or had long since lost and forgotten. And when they were satisfied, they lay together in their arms, in each other's arms. And she's thinking, I feel so good. It's something to do with this man. And he was feeling the same. Even though she looked terrifying, there was something opening up in his heart too. And then she says, I want another trick. And he said, oh no, let me play the harp for you, I'm a bit tired. And she said, no, I want more of the Cron Clish. And he said, but I need to rest and I'm hungry. Ah! And up she gets. And she said, I'll get you something. And she ran off as fast as the wind. And it seemed it was a matter of minutes when she came back with the deer in her arms. And she said, I've brought you food. And she's just about to tear it apart with her talons. And he goes, whoa, no, that's not how you do it. So he took the deer and had a knife and he chopped it up into pieces. And then he found some large colt's foot leaves. And he made parcels of the meat and the leaves and wrapped them up with nettle cord. Then he went off and he gathered some firewood and he lit a great fire. And he gathered stones and he placed the stones inside the fire. And while the stones were heating, he dug a fulucht fia and filled it with water from a nearby stream. And when the stones were red hot, he took them and he placed them into the water and then put the parcels of venison in there as well. And she's watching him all the time in fascination. And when the meat is done, he takes the parcels out of the fulucht fia and he takes out the bread and the cheese from his bag and opens up the parcels of meat and he feeds her lovingly, kindly, caring, and she is tasting food that she had never tasted before. And she said, I'm beginning to remember now, this is how we ate food before. This is how my father used to do it. Not the way, and this is so much better than the way I've been doing it. And then when they'd eaten their fill, he took her by the hand and he led her into the fulucht fia and he started to wash her, taking hundreds of years of muck and mud and grime from her skin. And he gathered some soapboard and tried to wash the leaves and the mud and muck from her hair. And when he had cleaned her as much as he could, he took her out and he wrapped her in the cloak and he held her in his arms and held her lovingly. And she said, don't leave me. And he looked into her eyes and he said, I'll not leave you. And with that, her heart began to open up again and the grief began to pour out and she cried and wept. And the tears rolled down her cheeks, right down along her body and right down the mountainside. And she released all that pent-up grief that had been held, locked deeply in her heart for those hundreds of years. And when there were no more tears to be cried, Dubh Rush made love to her once more, and then they fell into the deepest of sleeps. And she slept with peace for the first time in hundreds of years, where she dreamt of joy and happy things and remembered her father and laughter and happiness and song and music. Dubh Rush woke up early the next morning and he could see the deep sleep that Mish was in and he hadn't the heart to wake her. So he gently got up and he built a little bothy around her, covering it with leaves to shelter her. And off he went hunting. Later, when Mish woke up and she looked around and there was no sign of Dubh Rush, she panicked. She thought he had gone and that she was abandoned for a second time. And she wept and she wailed and wailed and wailed. Fortunately, Dubh Rush heard her crying and he came back and he said, what's the matter? She said, I thought you had left me. And he said, I told you, I will not leave you. I cannot leave you. For something had opened up in him as well as with her. So they stayed on the mountains for a number of months, and each day Mish's memories began to come back to her, and her heart opened up more, and her madness began to ease. She began to know peace and calm and tranquility once more. No longer did she have those fits of raging anger, but new laughter, new humour. And each day Dovrush would wash her, taking more and more layers of mud and muck and grime from her. And after about 3 months, he invited her to come down the mountain with him. And she agreed. And he took from his bag a dress that he had brought that first day. And he put it on her, and they walked back down the mountain to the longhouse of Phelim Mockriffin. And it is said that she looked as beautiful on that day as she had those hundreds of years previously, with her long golden hair and her skin as white as snow and her deep blue eyes and lips as red as hawberries. Just as beautiful as she was the day her father died. So Mish and Dovrush got married, and they had 4 children, and she was sought far and wide for her counsel. As I said, she had the perception and the vision, the visual acuity of the hawk, the stamina of the stag, the wisdom of the salmon, the endurance of the boar. And they lived very, very happily together until the day that Dovrush was killed. But that's a story for another time. So it would be interesting to know what what meaning you take from this story. In many ways, when we think of the effects of physical isolation, of never being touched, and not even in this pandemic, where for so many of us, we haven't been held or touched or hugged for the last 3 months. How unresolved grief leads us to rage. But I leave that meaning for you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope to be with you all next week, next Monday, for Tea with a Druid. Sinead, Slán go fóill.